the Chair of Public Safety. I'm joined here by Madam President Helen Hudson, also Councilor Gathers, Councilor Caldwell, Councilor Allen, Councilor Choles. Welcome to Public Safety Committee meeting. Second to that, there is a signing in sheet back in over there on that table there. So, Chief Cecil, we left a seat here specifically for you.
Oh, you want me up there?
Right there. You can fill that up, you know. And you are allowed to invite some folks there too if you like.
Okay, well, probably Mark Russell wants to.
Yeah.
You gonna do a presentation?
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, we promised we wouldn't bite, so. Yeah. So.
Do you want me to start then?
Yeah, soon. So the agenda, we have two agendas for today. The first one is to discuss the incident with the 80-year-old boy. We'll take a few-minute break to get into the other situation later. So, but let's take it away with the first one, Chief.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Counselor. I just want to read what I read in front of the press conference that we did the other day. We went over a lot of the video and things like that. So I just want to read it verbatim because I think it kind of answers a lot of questions. Some of the video that all of you saw was hard to watch. And of course it was. It was a child in the backseat of a patrol car crying his eyes out. And it was visceral. Even to officers, it was visceral to see. But the video that was pushed out by the citizen and the narrative that went viral was only part of the story. At the press conference, we saw a much broader, more video, and a more well-rounded story with a positive outcome. Some might even say uplifting when you watch the interaction of the officers with the children, not just the child they took home, but his three siblings and the father in the middle of the street where they live for 10 to 15 minutes engaging with those children and the father. And that video, which of course didn't go viral, ended with the officer saying, "Can I stop by sometime? If I'm in the territory, roll by and say hello to you and talk to you," instead of interacting the other way. That's how it was uplifting. This is not to say that the video had some low points, and we're looking at those and we're gonna learn from those and do things better the next time. But I ask that you not overlook all the things that went right with this interaction. Things not portrayed by that piece of video and narrative that went viral. The child was not handcuffed at any time. He was not arrested. He was not taken to jail. Beyond these tangible things, there were other things that went right as well with this interaction. The officers knew the child by face and name. Granted, not for the reasons we would like them to know them, but they knew him. They knew where he lived. When you watch the videos, they didn't even have to ask, "Where do you live?" They took him home. They knew the parents. And when they took the child home, they took time to engage with the father and the child and his three siblings one-on-one for several minutes, discussing what happened and what could be done better. Folks, this is Community Policing 101. It's what every citizen asks of their police department. It's what we ask of our officers as well. Know your territory, know the citizens in your territory, whether they're the adults or the children, and whenever possible, get out of your patrol car and spend time engaging with them, especially when you have a chronic problem that needs addressing. That's how we fix chronic problems. And let's be honest. This was a chronic problem. Young people had been committing crimes throughout the North Side neighborhood for weeks, if not months. Residents, business owners, and elected officials had repeatedly complained to the police department about thefts and criminal mischiefs being committed by these young people on a very frequent basis, often saying we weren't doing enough, sometimes saying we weren't doing anything. As a result of these chronic complaints, and I mentioned to the media, this is something they didn't know, and perhaps something all of you don't know, a district captain went to the children's home not less than a month ago, gave the kids badge stickers, which they immediately put on their shirts. Then this district captain, who's an extremely busy person, sat down and spent time speaking to the father, speaking to the four boys, talking to them about school, after-school programs, and what they enjoyed doing. Again, Community Policing 101. Some of these boys have also been recruited by Jimmy Oliver and have participated in some of the events sponsored by the Syracuse Police Department's Police Athletic League, otherwise known as PAL. They played sports alongside officers, Jimmy Oliver, and the mayor himself, these same children. So we're trying our best, folks. Our officers are trying their best too. We would prefer not to be put in these positions at all. We prefer to interact with these kids at PAL or in a pickup basketball game on the street, but we rarely have that luxury. The officers that responded to this 911 complaint of a larceny in progress located the child who was stealing, didn't handcuff him, didn't arrest him, didn't take him to jail. We don't do that. What they did do is call him by name, take him home to his father, and then stand in the street and have a long discussion with him. I personally don't know any parent who wouldn't want to know that their child was stealing. I personally don't know any parent who wouldn't want their child brought home if he was caught stealing or committing other crimes. And that's what happened. Overall, it was a good ending. I think at this point we need to move beyond vilifying the officers who did what any parent would want them to do, bring their child home and tell them what was going on so they could deal with it in a family situation. We need to move beyond that and work toward a broader strategy that allows us an alternative response to incidents like this. Someone with perhaps a clinical background in dealing with children who are struggling, so that the police can step out of that role and into the role of only positive interactions with young people in this city. And trust me when I say this, every single officer out there would like to do that. Interact with them at a basketball game, PAL, and not interact with them like this. But this is the part where I went off script. We are the only game in town. There are no other services out there to call, no one else, whether it's a barking dog or homicide. We are the only ones to call. And when it comes to this, none of us want to deal with an 8-year-old boy stealing chips. But when that call comes in from the store owner, a 911 call, there's no one else out there. It's just us. I want to thank you for your time. And I can open it up to questions, or Mark Russin has a presentation that goes beyond this to talk about even new laws that are about to be enacted down the road that do take us out of this, that do involve other entities coming in and taking over these types of situations so that we will no longer have to respond to these. So I don't know if you want to move right on to that, or...
Yeah, I would like Mark to talk a little bit in terms of the rules of how juvenile are supposed to be handled. Is there a rule around that?
Yeah, so there's several
Then
things.
we can have, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's several things that would control the way that a police officer would respond to a juvenile type call. I can send the policy on how we handle juveniles. It actually touches multiple different policies across our policy manual. So I'm happy to send those out as well too, because there are specific things that we would talk about. If you flip to kind of the fourth document, it's the first stapled document in the packet. It's a training bulletin that we released in, it looks like this. It's a training bulletin that we released in 2019. Remember, at the time, we were working through the raise the age legislation that was a waterfall start, went from one year to the next year, and it created new classifications, new titles for, it used to be just juvenile delinquent or juvenile offender, created a new definition under the law. And in response to that, the department put together this training memo. So it gives you the definition for each person. If you flip to the third page in that packet, it starts to show you some of the complexities of working with juveniles through the laws. And these flow charts were created by Detective Jeffrey Blauvelt. Did an excellent job creating these flow charts to show you how to handle and in what scenarios you handle, and how, what's the manner of questioning, who's the assigned counsel, who are the important people to contact. What about fingerprinting? All of these different tasks that would happen after the fact. So the first page is a 13-year-old. The next page is a 14 to 15-year-old, and then the page after that is a 16 and 17-year-old.
So where is the 13 and under? Like,
So-
what is that? Where's that?
Yep. So
13 and under?
yeah, and so we would so just for frame of reference. So I'll give you some time to digest that, because it is complicated. In 2021, we had 270 juvenile delinquent arrests. We had 17 juvenile offender arrests, and we had 91 adolescent offender arrests. The youngest juvenile delinquent.
You mean arrest? You mean arrest like you had to pick them up and take them to one of the juvenile justice places?
Yep, so I'll come right to that question here.
Okay.
So there is a process for some of these arrests, and it depends on if it's an adolescent offender or a juvenile offender, but I'm going to focus on juvenile delinquents because that's a little bit easier, and that's the majority of them. There's 270 of them. We have one juvenile youth enforcement detective. That one youth enforcement detective collects all of, so let's say that Mark Rustin's working patrol, I make an arrest, I put together the packet of paperwork that needs to be created, and the paperwork is dictated by the flow chart. Once I create that paperwork, I release the juvenile to their parents under most circumstances. I release them to their parent with a juvenile appearance ticket. Those cases are put together, and every Thursday, all of those cases are transmitted over to county probation. County probation is actually the first filter as to where these cases go. County probation does an assessment based upon each one of the cases to see if that case needs to go to family court. So there's an intermediary process. Most of them do not require detention, formal detention. I don't have those numbers in front of me right now as to how many people were actually referred to a formal detention facility, but I could get back to you with that. So there was 270 JD arrests in 2021. The youngest juvenile delinquent in 2021 was 11 years old. So the vast majority of the cases where there's a crime occurring, based upon the information that I have here today, is there is not an arrest being made. It's actually the parent is the juvenile is being taken back to the parent. I'll just go just a little bit more information about the first page there, the actual bar graphs, things that you're looking at. This is a year to date. So this is 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, and it's a year to date calls for service. So how many actual calls that we have for juveniles is coming in through the 911 center, and you can see the calls for service. So that's what's on the first page for this. If you skip forward, there's a paragraph. It's like the 6th or 7th page in. It's a definition. That's the current definition out of the Family Court Act, Part 1, Article 3, that defines what a juvenile delinquent is. And then the next packet, there's a summary of a bill. This bill was just passed. It's under our understanding, as I sit here today, that it has not taken full effect yet. It was signed into law February of 2022. The last page, if you look at the very last page, you'll see that the act for Section 15 says that it won't take effect for 1 year after. So we're trying to work through this law. We are aware of it, but this would change the definition of a juvenile delinquent and bump that age from 7 to 12. If you important section of this law starts on page 14, Title 12A. And this is the differential response programs for children under 12. So there's some new mandates, I would say, after reading it, for creating differential response programs for children under 12. But there's a lot to unpack here. I'm certainly not an expert on the law, but we are working with some of our partners to digest it.
So with that, Mark and Chief, Counselor, anybody with pressing question yet?
I have a
Okay.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, thank you, Mark, for this information. It's very helpful. On a normal case, when we're working with our youth in the community, right, and you have an opportunity, the police officers, like for instance, knew that young child that was being detained that day. I won't say arrested, I'll just say detained. What are your normal circumstances? Like, what is your policy and procedure that normally would go on with something like that? Like, is there like a 211 call that you make, when there's a family in distress, or a kid that you're often seeing? Is there, besides reaching out to social services and that, I mean, that, you know, the next thing when they get detained to go to the court system, is there anything that you have your officers ready to be trained for if they see those type of calls, like we got to call 211 or we got to call an organization because we see these children are outside, you know, being mischievous and leaving into other things? So is there any policy and procedure that you guys have in order?
So yeah, so there's not, I don't know if it's necessarily written down policies or procedures, but in case of this one, and we've all seen the updated news, he's still getting in trouble. His whole family, there's a lot of problems there, a lot of challenges, a lot of dysfunction. So when we had the second incident with him, the officers were directed to do referrals to social services. Someone needs to intervene into that family. And it's not us, clearly, but we did make referrals to county social services.
Oh, yes, oh, yes.
So that is the area of the gap, clearly. Immediately what's rolling through my mind, there was an expert in Syracuse.com this morning, so I've already reached out to her because she talked about some other models throughout the country. We have seen success with diversionary response as it pertains to mental health and persons in crisis, which are typically individuals having struggled with mental health issues or substance abuse triggered behaviors in the public. So in my head, I'm thinking we have that template that we can mirror around children. Here's the catch. Those are adults, these are kids. So we have to, and that's why I'm reaching out to the professional, because it really is about child development, education. Everybody wants to help, but we're talking about children. The other thing that the police have pointed out that is critical is that while they don't have to wait a significant time for Liberty Resources, there is a bit of a gap there. Police maintaining the scene while the outreach team is coming, if they haven't already responded with them. We don't have that luxury when we have a child. So when we talk about alternatives to response, when we say immediate response, it has to be immediate. And so those are some of the nuances around trying to mirror. It can't be cookie cutter because we're talking about children, but that's some of the things I'm working on right now.
Can I piggyback on that? Because Deputy Mayor, we've talked about this, so I agree. But what I'm concerned about is we have dumped millions and millions of dollars into different programs that's supposed to touch children. So I really need to see where the accountability lies. I really need to see who's really out there touching these kids so that you can have someone that can respond to you when you have that situation. So I'm taking a deep dive, and I'm gonna look at the millions of dollars and how they're being accounted for when we're talking about our children.
And nobody's trying to pass the buck because we do enough of that around here. But that law specifically does identify the county social service agency. So that would be our Child and Family Services out of the county. Probably last Thursday or Friday, I had a conversation with Ann Rooney, even prior to knowing about that law, because I know that much of that safety net for children is funding that the county has.
The other thing I would like to say, thank you, Deputy Mayor. And this is again, I'm just asking questions because I know the summer is coming, right? And we love our children, and we all are here because we love our children. So moving forward, what steps are we taking to make sure that when we're connecting with our youth in the community, because right? It's going to be outside. The weather's getting nice. Kids have been in the house with COVID. Our microphones, I talk better without it. They've been in the house because of COVID, right? And mental health is huge, right? With adults, but especially with these babies. They are suffering. They're suffering because they have been isolated. They're suffering because things have changed. So knowing that, you're going to have more interactions with youth, right? What are you guys have in place, or what can we do as a council to help be more effective so that we can make sure that trauma is not being involved when kids are interacting with the police or the community. Like, what can we do to make this better? That's what I would like to know.
Sure, that's a great question. And being that I've had this job for about, 8 hours now, I'm just kidding. So it's all stuff we've been doing. Counselor, PAL is a huge one. As I mentioned, 3 of those kids were in PAL. They played soccer with the mayor and officers and Jimmy Oliver. We have to continue to work off of PAL. We have to continue to expand it so officers are interacting with them on a daily basis so that when they see these kids on the street, hopefully not committing crimes, but if they are, they can walk right up to them, call them by name, and have some connection there. Oh, hey, I played soccer with you. I played baseball with you. So that's one thing. Beyond that, we have to, as Deputy Mayor said, we get the finger pointed at, and I'm not saying you're doing it, but we as police get the finger pointed to us a lot. Just this morning I was on an interview and they're like, what are you going to do about the mall? Well, there's solutions, but they don't just include the police department. They include mall, private security, things like that. Same case here, if not more. There are all kinds of agencies out there. This gentleman, I believe, is a New American. There's Catholic Charities, there's other agencies that need to be able to come. Maybe they can't go to the scene with us, although that would be the best thing. But afterwards, they need to intervene after. Because I will tell you this, and this isn't anecdotal, and I know you will understand it, most people on this council, we've seen it as police officers and you've seen it. You start with stealing chips, you move on to something else, then you move on to burglary, and then you move on to robbery, and then you end up at one end of the gun or the other. There has to be programs that go in and intervene and stop that, but it isn't all us. But we are going to obviously continue to discuss this. We have to bring other agencies in on it that step in after we leave that scene.
Not to take the mic, but I love the babies is like really important to me. So you said something very important. I'm going to speak for myself. I think we all failed that family. It's not just the police department. I think it's a community thing but we're going to see, not to put it out there, but there's a lot of youth like him, right? There's a lot of families that are struggling and suffering. So with that being said, sometimes your officers are the first ones that see this, right? You see a turnaround of the same youth coming through, or store owners, or breaking glass, or doing just mischievous things that leads them, like you said, the next thing is burglary, next thing. We want to mitigate that, stop that, and put a hold on that. So one of the things I would love to do, and I said, like, the programs, is there any way that we can figure out, like, when you officers are seeing those younger kids that they're not making them to family court yet, right? Because they're just doing the mischievous things. Is there any kind of way that we can, like, get a list or try to work on so that we can get them the help and the support they need, right? We can find out if families are at working and the kids are latchy kids and they're just outside, or something else. But if they're not identified and we wait too late, because that's what we tend to do with these youth, we wait too late and then they become the 13 or 14-year-olds and then the 15 and 16 and now. But if we're recognizing these kids at 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and they're concerned, then we need to collaborate through the county, the city, the school, the community, every program, and connect with these families, because there's resources out there. And if they're saying they're doing what we do, we want to make accountable of what they're doing. We're going to build on it. But we need your help to say, listen, these are the kids that we keep seeing, is there a way that we can build that to try to connect? That was my question.
Yep, it's a great question. I'm hoping we can. Now, Mark probably knows them better than I. I'm not sure about the logistics, the legalities of releasing names of 7-year-olds that are involved in things. We would love to give those names out to folks like you and service providers that would go over there and try to do whatever they can to put that person on the right path. Mm-hmm. We'd love that, but we'll look into that without a doubt. We will look into that, and if it's something we can do, we will do it. Yep.
And Deputy Mayor, we had this conversation, right, when we talked about this. So the more I think about it, I had talked about social workers.
Sure.
But what I'm thinking is, there are children's therapists. Is there any kind of a way that we can bring a couple of child therapists to the table?
I need social workers, and I need child therapists, teachers, professionals in the field who understand child development, understand the development of children's brains, to help even say what a successful project will look like. I'm not a child development professional. I just know that we have a problem, and my job is to try to find a solution. But I'm bringing in the experts who understand child development, and I don't want to duplicate things. So if there's anything, for example, that might be, the county has invested millions of dollars into the school district. Are any of those models that we can use but to replicate out in the community as well, instead of building something from scratch? So we know we have the diversionary response model. I don't look to reinvent that model, but how can I evolve that model so that it effectively and efficiently addresses children? And the discussion that was just happening is the answer, because the interaction with police is the moment in time, and you're absolutely right. Officers who are getting to know their beat and knowing their families see a 7 or 8 year old constantly in trouble or constantly fighting. I hope there is a way that we can legally share that information, because I think it is a good path. What I'm trying to avoid is kind of this splintered all over effect that is not productive. If there's a way we can funnel
Everybody needs to
the information through
together
one
on
source,
this,
right?
Because everybody is having a hard time digesting this, so everybody should come together on this. The MSWs, the social workers, that's fine, but child therapy, child psychologists, they're a whole different breed. They work directly with that child. So if we could actually have some of those folks sitting at the table
Yep.
to guide us.
And while, for example, Ryan McMahon Center deals with a very specific type of child trauma,
Right.
they know the processes. They know what systems work when it comes to interacting with families.
Man, it's McMahon's.
McMahon Ryan. I do that all the time. Sorry, county exec.
So with that as a follow-up, I'm wondering, Chief, which goes to what Councilor Caldwell was kind of asking. Prior to this, what happened with this little boy? Is there a connection between school district when we talk about mental health? Because school district has some way where they have this information early on, because they interact with these children quite a bit. Was there a discussion, evaluation from the school district, from the counselors, that was fed to maybe the police and, the community? Because it's hard. I don't want to believe that this child, that somehow somebody in the world isn't aware of what's happening with them. Somebody's aware, right? Right? Before it got to that point, somebody was aware. School district, did they go to school? Was there red flag raised for this child before they? So 8 years old. Somebody got to know something.
Sorry, Mark. One thing we run up against a lot, Counselor, is that the very laws that are set forth to protect us sometimes present barriers. So there may be HIPAA, or there are quite a few very distinct information protections under the state education process that prohibit that type of thing. Again, as the chief said, we're going to work through and see what we can legally do, because those protections are there for a good reason, to protect the sanctity of that information. But we still want to make sure that we're not leaving an option on the table.
We're talking about protecting the sanctity. I'm just going to say this. I'm going to follow the same vein that Councilor Caldwell followed. I'm sure there were people in that particular, in all the communities. They know the kids, they know who they are, they watch it happening, they complain to each other, and they never say anything. So there's a community that sees this happening. So where's the community?
And it might be the matter of they don't know who to say something to, because if you call the cops, then situations like this happen.
They call us in the mayor's office any other time, they might well call us.
Yeah, but then that's what I'm saying. Like, then you got to refer it to somebody else.
But that's what they do. So if you know it's been
just
happening
highlighting
for a
the
year,
issue, the bigger issue.
then let's talk about it.
Councilor Gather?
Yes, I just have one question I gotta ask. Is it Corp Counsel here, right? Yeah. Did you get aware of the new law, or anything?
It's just been sent to me now while we're here, so I haven't had a chance to review it and digest it, but I will do that, and I will be working with Chief Cecil and the mayor's office to try to at least come up with potential solutions. We are going to be faced with issues involving HIPAA and other privacy-related issues. The police cannot just on their own because they see a youth in trouble, reach out and disclose that youth's name. But it may be that we have to ultimately seek a change in legislation. Until we do the deep dive to figure out how to bring all the parties together, we won't have a solution for you. But this issue highlights what has to happen in the community to get these kids the services that they need. And unfortunately, I think right now, until a youth is put into the system, arrested and put into the system, they don't have access to all of the supports that are out there. And some of it is for this very reason, because we're not telling you and you're not telling us because we're prohibited by law from disclosing certain things. So it's going to really require all the parties to come together to make a change for the benefit of the greater good.
If I could just go back to kind of two questions here about, so just when we do make that arrest, that intermediate step is to the county probation, as I mentioned before. County probation will try to, it's voluntary programs that the juvenile will enter into with their parents. So if the juvenile is voluntarily willing to go to a service and county probation attaches a service with that child, that's one of the times where a service, but an arrest has to occur.
Arrest or detention?
An arrest, because the arrest is the actual time that the lever gets pulled. So it's this difficult time where we don't want to be in arresting position, but right now the only time that the lever is pulled is when the arrest is actually being made, and that's when the pairing between services and the juvenile actually occurs outside of the school district, or something that the family might be doing, but from a law enforcement perspective. So that was just one thing I wanted to bring back up. The other thing too, and you operationally, you had asked about, how do these notifications work? What kind of notifications do actually occur? So there's two things that have been a standing practice of the police department since I've been here, is that if there's a major incident, and I'm not talking about some of the low-level things, right? There's definitely a gap there. But if there's a major incident, these internal notifications are made to the school resource officer sergeant. So at least he or she could be aware of what was going on, especially if they thought there was a nexus to the school district. The other thing, though, is that on the more serious incidents that might not be criminal yet, that surround gun violence, on our weekly ComStat, we do discuss some of these juveniles, especially if we've seen something, we're aware of something, and then the school resource officer sergeant will be tasked by one of the chiefs or the deputy chief with going out and speaking to the parent. Are you aware of this? This has been a practice of the police department for quite some time. I couldn't tell you exactly when it started, but when we start to see things that are specifically, gun violence or violence related, that process would occur, and those tasks or responsibility get doled out on a weekly basis.
Now,
So I think the reason why a lot of this kind of sparked people's attention was obviously from the video, but it was the way that the officers were handling the child. So I see the flow chart in here of what you do when you, when you're with someone under 13, but is there any training available for the officers so they'll be aware of how they handle the children when they get to them? Because from the naked eye, we didn't see what happened in the store. So if I'm walking up and I see an adult grabbing a kid like that, like he grabbed him like he was a pit bull, like by the back of his hood, and then dumped the chips on him. So if I see that, then I'm gonna assume that the officer is doing something wrong. So is there any training for officers so they're aware of how they're actually handling the children?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So the state mandates 11 hours of what we call use of force training. So SPD does 40 hours of use of force training just in like a brick and mortar setting where we actually train this stuff. But then we do other reality-based scenarios and things of that nature. One of the things that we focus on in that training that is above and beyond is de-escalation, demeanor, how to handle juveniles. But it's not just juveniles, and this comes up, we just did taser training for all the patrol officers, and we always address juveniles. And I believe you've asked this question, like, what about juveniles, or a pregnant female, or someone who's elderly? How do you think? So we touch all of these areas where we could have a vulnerable population, and we talk about that through the lens of, if it's a taser, we talk about through there, or just through the use or application of any force option. But yeah, we do talk about it. We don't We don't just say you can do this and eliminate all the other variables. We really try to focus on some of those other variables that could become present, because that's the reality of what the officers will be facing.
Now, along that line, Chief, what do you think could have been done different to kind of make this outcome a little bit less emotional as it was?
One thing would be for someone to see the entire video instead of a short part of the video. And I don't want to get off topic, but the only person that viral video and that narrative benefited was not the child, was not the police, obviously, was that gentleman that did it. He did it for his own benefit so that he could get a bunch of clicks and end up on Good Morning America. Moving forward, you have to keep in mind that the overall picture of that entire thing, and with positive, I don't know if you saw the video. You mentioned earlier you didn't see it.
Yeah,
You
no,
should
I
really watch
saw
it. At the very end, with these
saw a lot
officers
of
in the
it,
middle of
yeah.
the street talking to these kids, and they end with, "Can we drive by sometime? Just stop by, say hello to you. When we're not dealing with something else, say hello to you." So the overall thing was positive. If you're asking me what could be done better, there were lows to that. Some of the bantering back and forth, perhaps some of the way they handled the child, but overall, it was a positive outcome because it was community policing. The best outcome for that would be that we don't go at all, that there's somebody else that goes, a phone number that's called, and someone else responds to those things, those types of things. Just like we're doing with mental health, we have another child one. I did want to mention too, so it reminded me, when we talk about confidentiality and laws and everything, and the deputy mayor mentioned how they're there for a benefit, and they are, but sometimes they also don't allow us to get done what we need to do. So your predecessor, Sue Boyle, came up with this program, talked to me about it, and we implemented it. And it fell apart because of this confidentiality. It was called SOS, Save Our Students. And what was happening is when an officer went to a house, that whether it was a domestic, whatever it was going on there, if you saw 2 or 3, I keep ignoring them, I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
If they saw 2 or 3 children, they collected their names. You're talking 3 in the morning, you have kids up like this, watching something terrible happen. They were collecting their names, getting on a report, and then they were writing in this box that we had, SOS, which went to the sergeant that oversaw the SROs. He would then forward that report to the school where they went, and then they would get some counselors involved. The second those students came into school, it came as a result of an incident we had that was horrendous, where this male, I'm not sure if they were married or not, but boyfriend, girlfriend, he had a fight at 2 in the morning, held her at knife point in front of these children, let her go, held the 2 children at knife point before we could get into this house. And those children were sitting in math class 2 hours later, and the teacher's expecting them to concentrate. So we came up with this program. It was a great program so that someone could intervene and know what they went through the night before and help them out. But it fell apart because of this confidentiality. We were not clear whether we were allowed to keep sharing these names. Some of them were very young names with even the school district. So, but it's been a great program. Again, I don't know. I know Corporation Council's out. Stu knows a lot of stuff about that, but that's why it fell apart. The very rules that are there to help, retain this confidentiality broke down this program that would have been very beneficial.
Okay. So at what point, when incident becomes so repetitive like that, at what point does the police maybe reach outside of the family household to maybe a larger community? Is there a time at all there where you say, okay, I have brought this to the attention of the parents, like with the Neo-American community, you're familiar, there's quite a number of folks with the Neo-American community that are leaders within the community. Is there some point where police say, you know what, this, without bridging confidentiality line, can I reach over to maybe Joel, Jai, Ty, or somebody else with the new, is there a time like that?
Yeah, there's absolutely a time when we can do that, Councilor. And again, keep in mind with this particular incident, and I know it sounds like it happened in the second incident. First, we had the incident with the officers, and then we had the incident that occurred the very next day where the child stole the bike. Even though that sounds like 2 incidents, it was multiple incidents these officers have been dealing with. But at that point, we engaged social services. We did a referral to them, and they could take it from there and go into that house and see what services they need. But your idea is even better, because this guy, I don't know if he'll listen to social services, and it's my understanding that they tried to reach out before, and he just closed the door on them. So you have to find someone else that has a better inroad, that can talk to him, and he can open the door and they can go in there. I don't know, we would have to really work on that, on who we reach out to and who we give this information to. But your idea would work better. Whoever this father would listen to would be the best person to talk to him. He's working 2 jobs, but you have an 8-year-old that is running around a neighborhood sometimes blocks away by himself committing crimes.
And
It's borderline endangering the welfare. So,
which brings me to my next question, Chief. And I want to take the emotion out of it and look at it, this situation objectively, right? To me, you have reached out as a police to the parent. Social service have reached out to the parents. And the person really getting affected in this situation is not even a parent, it's a child. Now, at what point as a community do we say, okay, because I personally, I'm a product of foster care, right? I'm a product of foster care. Was it great to be in foster care? Would I have preferred something else? Absolutely, right? But at what point do we step in and say, you know what, for the sake of the child, something different has to be done than this, because the direction, as you articulated earlier, from 8 years old, by the time they hit 14 to 17, they are doing all kind of different things. But maybe reaching to this child and using something different to be able to help this child early. When does that conversation start, especially with the police, and where you raise your hand and say, you know what, I don't want to keep showing up at this house like this. Social service, we contact them, they're doing nothing. You know, CPS, when does this conversation happen?
Well, Constable, if I may interject.
Yeah.
One thing, you know, when we were running for this past election was accountability, just like we talked about earlier with giving money to programs and things like that. The child needs to have a program or something that they're able to go to. I remember when I was younger, which was not that long ago, as we all know, but you know, we had 21st century, we had after school programs.
5 years ago.
You know, yeah. But it's just the programs that we used to have that were available for many kids that were around my age are not here anymore. That's due to funding, due to lack of staff thereof, whatever. At the time, I do remember, you know, when Officer Friendly was around, Officer Diglio was their officer, Officer Friendly. He would show up to basketball games, VJA, YEOP, you know, all those things. When I dunked on Rashida back then too, you know, it just.
Imagine that one.
But those are things that we had to help reduce the act of violence among our juveniles and youth that we had at least when I was paying attention to it. Hamburger. Hamburger as well.
Hamburger, yeah.
Then, well, you know, with my time that I had up at Hillbrook, when I was dealing with the juveniles up there at Hillbrook, they had nothing to do. So when the police, I look at it, when the police get involved, it's to the point where people are like, you know what, I'm just fed up. We try to do this, we try to do that. Now we got to take it to the next level. We don't want them to have that interaction on a negative side with the police department, but it's the community and accountability. That's all I can speak on with that.
Which for me, Counsel, and that's a great point, which for me, I think where I'm trying to go with this is that foundational piece. You know, for all of this program to function, there has to be some foundation where these kids, when they leave the program, see, when they are in the program, that's great. But where the huge damage happens is when there are no programs, and this program can't happen 24 hours, right? There's so much programs can do, which bring me to the point where that foundation, where program could be enhanced, where program can function better. Where do we have that conversation, especially? And I'm saying this just to be somewhat rhetorical, Chief. And I know there's a part where you can't cover. And Deputy Mayor, thank goodness you're here, because this is where we listen and trying to project what would work. But where do we intervene and say, you know what, something different got to happen? something different got to happen, because if you show, if your officers keep showing 2, 3, 4 times, social service is aware, school is aware, CPS is aware, what do we do here? Because something got to happen.
Just kind of what you just talked about, the convening happens in family court, but we don't want kids to get to that point. The convening of all of those, what's going on in school, what's going on in the program, what the interactions with the police. It all converges into family court. It's sad for me to say this, but when I knew that we issued a ticket for that young man, that's when I said he's going to get some help. You shouldn't have to be issuing a ticket for him to get help. And when I say help, I'm not talking about time in a gym with a basketball. I mean therapy for him and his family, therapy. And so Lateef Johnson-Kidsley said something to me, I said it earlier today, that just keeps resonating with me. Our child issue is not a child issue, it's an adult issue. And so to that point, all of us, to President Hudson's point, that are getting paid to provide the service, holding each other accountable. But this is the hard part of the conversation nobody wants to talk about. It is also adults being held accountable for the children that they have birthed into this world. And then if you as an adult don't have the capacity or the support you need, that's where we come in as municipalities, as elected officials, to help support you.
And I want to add a little bit to that, Deputy Mayor. But here's where I think sometime where we have to recognize what we have done. If the social service has reached out and the door has been closed on them, right? How much can you do?
Let me just say this though, Counselor. I hear what you're saying, but we got to understand, in the city of Syracuse, we are a trauma-filled city. And it's not just the kids, it's the adults as well. We have to address the trauma. We have to look at it. I'm sure you guys are traumatized, because everybody in the city of Syracuse is suffering from the same types of actions, reactions, and trauma. We gotta start looking a little deeper into what we're dealing with. Yeah, you snatched me by my collar like that, you'd probably had a fight out of me. Because again, we don't know what's gonna trigger somebody. So we have to be a little more conscious of how we're handling people. Because there is trauma in these homes, in these streets, and even in the schools. So everybody here knows it. So let's talk about the trauma and how we can work to kind of fix that. Because I keep saying Syracuse is not a huge city. We're a medium-sized, big city. And we all know each other. So if we all know each other, why can't we figure out a way to try to address some of these problems? Because everybody know I'm not quiet about mine. I got one that's mentally ill. And I know you guys have had quite a time with him. But you know what? That's the trauma that he's suffering from. So that's what I really believe we need to start addressing.
Just one more thing, and I think I'm gonna shut up. There is the immediate thing. I'm thinking about what I need to do right now. There's the immediate thing, and that's how I can put in place a system that reduces the number of contacts that can happen, either co-response or another entity responding, which is what we do for mental health right now. So that is one. The larger conversation is way beyond the city of Syracuse. So a lot of people are saying, city, you have to. The city doesn't manage or have oversight over any safety net program, not one. And so that we cannot do on our own. And that's why that legislation does not mention municipalities. It mentions the social work structures of counties. And so and I can't do it without the county. And so I already, like I said, reached out to Ann Rooney and said, what do we do? I mean, we have mechanisms. Where are people falling out through the cracks, to your point?
And it's deeper than just the counties though, Deputy Mayor, because we have funders out here. And we got funders throwing money. So we got to start wrapping that all up and find out where we're throwing money at.
Yeah, I'm inundated. I said I was going to shut up till Helen said that, but I'm inundated, for example, with the ability to give out money. So violence prevention, we have money set aside, But I'm not going to just give out violence prevention money without a process by which we're going to use it. And everyone's heart is big and ready to go. But no longer, a friend of mine said, gone are the days that you throw a basketball out there and then say that, you know, you prevented something. How are we measuring? How are we knowing that what you did impacted the lives of children? And that's very hard for grassroots organizations to be able to get around, being able to show all of us that they've done that, because they don't have the capacity. They just have the skill and the knowledge as gatekeepers in community. So how can we build their capacity?
Absolutely, and the grassroots community has actually just started being brought to the table. So it's bigger than the grassroots, because we have foundations that's putting money out here as well. I work for one, so we need to start holding the folks that's charged with doing this accountable.
Yep. And President Hudson, many of those organizations can't even keep staff because they can't pay people enough. They want to hire people that have a degree, that studied teaching and decided, I don't want to be in a classroom, I want to be in the community. They can't afford them. So we all react, and Syracuse is always ready to come to the table and figure out how to do it. It is a complicated, multi-layered issue.
And I want to share a little story, because when the incident happened, a friend of mine called me and said, Joel, you know, this is, and I'm saying this to go back to the accountability piece, and said, Joel, when I was a child, I went to a store, and I stole a candy bar. And I was with my parents, and my parent went home with me after that. And I had that in my pocket. And when we got home, my parents saw the candy and said, where did you get that? And said, I got it from the store. I said, okay. My mother grabbed my hand and walked me back to the store and told me, tell this individual, the owner of the store, tell him what you did. And she paid the quarter, okay, to the store owner, and made sure, right. And what I'm trying to say here, and I'm not blaming anybody, but I think that the accountability piece, especially, I'm a parent myself, you know, except you, all of us are parents here, right? We understand what it takes, especially when it comes to accountability, what it takes for a parent to do their part. And I think as people, there's that part where we can do so much, but at the same time we need help from the parent themselves, right? And I think that's yes.
This is my last point, and then for time's sake, you know, I know we got another.
And then I'm next.
We got a second part to this.
Sorry, Counselor.
No, you can go. If it's on.
One solution that I thought that could, you know, back to the mayor's point, everybody that talked about, that spoke, was communication. That's the easiest thing that we could do when we have all these organizations, instead of being reactionary all the time and all this stuff. Because every time something happens, this is what we do. I mean, we've been doing this for years. You know, just simple communication. We have these programs that are supposed to be helping out with, you know, violence prevention and things like that. If they get information, the information gets passed over to the police department, the mayor's office, whoever it has to go to, they'll be able to tackle those things together. And then I think that would be the first line to actually getting something done.
And before I pass it to Councilor Choles, also Northside Learning Center. Northside Learning Center has been very instrumental in the lives of these children. They go to the mass, they have lunch there, they have services there. So it's not like these kids have been abandoned. It's just there's a little disconnect from the bottom. There's a little disconnect in which is Northside Learning Center and a couple of other community leaders are trying to work to figure out what to be done to these children. Because as you said, yes, this is going on, and we got to get ready for what's next, because something might be happening again, you know. And we got to get we got to get ready and figure something else out, because it seems like even if they are referred to this program, it's not enough, right?
So to that point,
to your point, Chief, about confidentiality. At what point can SPD even call Northside Learning Center and say, you've got kids that live around the corner, do you know their name is Billy and Joey? Are you familiar with them? Because they kind of get in trouble a lot. Like, is that even allowed? I would think that that's a breach of confidentiality.
You'll have to look into it, but I've always thought, you could go with benefit, what was the higher benefit? Do it, but, you have to
Laws.
ask attorneys and stuff.
Laws.
Right. Exactly, maybe Corp Counsel can answer that, but, no, you can't? Okay.
My answer is, it is an issue. And we have to look at the law as it stands with respect to the privacy of children and figure out a way to allow this good aspect to take place. And if I can just take 2 seconds to comment on some of the things you have said. I think one of the things that's going on, I sit on the Gifford.
Get closer to the mic. Yeah, there you go.
I can't see you then.
All right.
I sit on the Gifford board, and one of the things that we are looking at now is that we are having these issues with youth. And so how can we concentrate on putting programs together to help with youth? But one of the concerns that I voiced was, much like you were saying, you have all these different agencies, and they all mean well, but they're all operating in silos. And so you're not getting the best leverage for what you're trying to do because they're not communicating. And that's no knock on them. They all started out to do a good thing. They need to come together so that you're leveraging your dollars in a way that truly benefits the kids in the most meaningful way. And I think, I also used to sit on Say Yes to Education. And I think one of the issues is you can't possibly start young enough reaching out to families, reaching out to parents, and trying to provide programming and guidance for these young children. It is hard enough to raise children when you have resources. It is impossible to raise them when you don't. And one of the things that we struggled with, me in particular, is we were holding free legal counsel to anyone in the school district who wanted to come. And no one was coming. And I couldn't figure it out. And someone said to me, well, you should change the name. And I was like, what do you mean? And it was clinic. We had the word clinic in it. And someone said to me, people view that as a negative. They don't understand what that means. And so you have people out there like myself who were trying to do something positive who didn't understand that it was having a negative impact or wasn't being perceived the way it should be. So again, start young, partner with the school district, figure out what everyone's doing and try to come up with a way to leverage those efforts in a more meaningful way.
Sure. Thank you. That's so true. Just one thing I'd like to say. 2 questions. We still have the SROs in the schools, right? All the high schools, but none in the middle schools anymore, right? Okay. And the other thing is one of the biggest things, Core Counsel, I want you to know is the TT rule in the community. Trust, right? And trauma. Our community do not trust people, right? And they dealt with it because of trauma. And that's I call it the TT rule. And until we change that narrative, it's going to always be that way. And it starts off with the community, the policing, and everything we're doing here. And like I said, I'm not blaming. I take blame too for what's going on with our youth because we all know what's going on and we close our eyes. We see it all the time. I'm a victim of watching the kids sometimes like, do I say something in the street or do I let him go and just do what he's doing? Because I don't know what's going to happen next, right? And it's not also programs. Programs are a major issue in our community. We have very little programs, very little resources for our youth, but we always have to remember that core circle of families. We can't do nothing if we're not dealing with the parents. So the parents have to be, or a caregiver has to be a part of whatever we structurize moving forward with the youth. Someone has to be involved because they still have to go home. So we can give them everything they want, but then they have to still go home in that environment, that a trauma environment. And our youth and our adults are dealing with trauma. It's the TT rule, trust and trauma. They work together. And that's why, Chief Cecil, I would have to say, is that's why the gentleman, I don't know who it was that videotaped it, is because it's just a reaction in the community. It's like, whoa, something's going on. So it's the trust and the trauma that they deal with, which clicks into making them want to do video because they don't trust and they deal with trauma. So it's just it's like a reaction. It's like, what's the correct way to deal with trauma? Who knows? There's no right and wrong way. Some people yell, some people scream, some people stand still, some people act, and our community is dealing with trauma, and it's like electric shot all over, and we're having a hard time dealing with it. So I just wanted to make sure I let you know that I blame myself and the whole community for not just this young boy, but everything that's going on, because we got to come together to make this better, and I know we can. So.
Can I ask a really quick question? Youth enforcement detective, you had mentioned that, one of you did. Can you explain that a little bit more? What is that person? How many do you have like that, and what do they do?
So there's one youth enforcement officer. I believe it was in 2011, we had approximately 4, and it's gone down. We're looking at those numbers right now, and I'll get you that information. But there was one, and then there was a sergeant. Now that those supervisory responsibility are delegated over the course of several people, because it's more of a part-time responsibility. So there's one youth
Do you
enforcement.
think we need more? Do you think we need to bring them back? I mean, are they boots on the ground? Are they in an office? Where are these people, or that person?
So she works out of the Criminal Investigations Division, and she is the one that's responsible during the hours between 8 and 4, assisting patrol officers with completing all the paperwork, getting that information over to the county, making sure if there's a follow-up in terms of paperwork to do that. But to have the numbers of crimes that we're looking at, patrol officers are dealing with those, but to have the number of crimes that we're looking at and only have one detective there, it's very difficult. But this is a staffing issue.
Okay, and then one last question. On the 13 and the 15 paper, you have in the bottom right corner, document and release to parent guardian. So that document, is that female officer that you were talking about? Is that the report that gets generated?
All patrol officers would generate those reports.
Okay.
She's there to assist in completing any paperwork that needs to be done, but then and follow up maybe on some small things. If something's missed, the county probation calls back and says, oh, there's a piece of information that we still need. She would follow up on that. But that's all completed by the patrol officers engaging with the youths.
And do all of those documented reports go to county probation, or not necessarily?
If it's a criminal act, it would go to county probation, but there would be reports. The no charges.
Yeah. Because that went right down to document release. I'm just wondering if this family, and I'm guessing they did, have a lot of documented and released, then if it just sat in a file and nobody's paying attention to it, no offense, but what's the point? So can we activate that information a little more, and can we connect it to or call the schools? And again, confidentiality, so I don't know how we can achieve these things, but if there's any change we can make in that regard, because I think you guys do the hard work, and then to have it just put in some file, buried in some cabinet, is not helping the child or the family. So that would be my push.
We got it. We have to transition, but before we transition to the next chapter, please understand this. We're talking about one family. It's 500 more in the city of Syracuse. So let's keep our eyes on the prize and look at all of these kids that's actually in crisis.
So we are going to take 2 minutes so we can transition to the next one. All right?
Let's roll.
Yes. Take a bathroom break.
When do you get in the new one?
We'll be back. 2 minutes.
Come on now. Okay. Yeah, who's your first chapter? Did they announce?
Let me go to the little girl's room.
Chief?
Hey, gentlemen, how are you?